Delighted to introduce our next witness, the gentleman from Tennessee, Senator Bob Corker. Sir, it's great to have you in front of the Joint Select Committee this morning. Again, as I said earlier, written comments will be made part of the record, and we'll give you the adequate amount of time to make your case this morning before this committee, and we appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you for holding these meetings, and I appreciate what you're doing. I'll be very brief. I know we all are a little bit behind schedule. First of all, I came to Washington 11.5 years ago, and one of the focuses was on fiscal issues. And what I've learned is that Democrats and Republicans both like to spend money. They just like to spend it on different things. I became a member of the Budget Committee a few years ago. It's been the biggest waste of time one can possibly imagine. It has nothing to do with the leadership of the committee. It's that it's nothing but a political tool each side uses. There's no policy put behind the changes. And as I've said to Senator Perdue and others, Senator Whitehouse, we ought to actually do away with the Budget Committee because it performs no useful function as it relates to causing us to be fiscally sound. Secondly, we major in the minors. There's all this talk about appropriations, so we spend the entire year focusing on 30% of what we spend, which again is majoring in the minor. 70% of the money we spend is on mandatory spending. These are programs that people are counting on, especially during the latter years of their life. And we do nothing whatsoever to ensure that they're going to be fiscally sound. Everything ought to be, in my opinion, on budget, everything, including Social Security, which would cause us to focus on the fact that in the not too distant future, it's going to be fiscally unsound. So, you know, again, there's a lot of talk and a lot of work that goes into appropriations and budgeting each year, but we major in the minors. The appropriations process is, you know, that we have authorizing committees that have almost nothing is authorized. And so, seriously, we ought to consider combining the authorizing functions and the appropriating functions together. It ought to be one. I talk to people on the Foreign Ops side. I'm chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and there may be a little bit of hyperbole here, but they tell me they spend about 5 hours putting together over $50 billion worth of spending, whereas the authorizing committee itself spends all year doing hearings. It's totally ridiculous. So, look, I think you've got a big task. I would say, first of all, put everything on budget, everything. Look at combining the operations of both authorizing and appropriating. Do away with the Budget Committee and let a few leaders decide what the caps are going to be over the next couple of years, and quit using the budget itself as a political tool. Beyond that, I really don't have many comments.
We appreciate the gentleman for his appearance here this morning. Any questions?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
If I may.
Senator Whitehouse, welcome.
Senator Corker joins me on the Budget Committee, so he knows whereof he speaks, and I wanted to thank him for his work on the Budget Committee. He's one of the reform-minded folks. Before we entirely get rid of the Budget Committee, at least in the Senate, I think we should give it one last chance. And as I've said in my earlier comments and in the proposal that I've shared with the committee, I think there's a chance to create a bipartisan path that would actually have to be bipartisan in order to be taken, that would take into account the mathematical elements of the budget, all of them, healthcare spending, tax spending, the whole bit, and see if the Budget Committee can work together to get a bipartisan agreement that picks a debt-to-GDP safe point out in the future, figures out how long it'll take to get there, creates that glide slope, creates alarm bells for that glide slope, and then on a bipartisan basis, you know, polices us towards a safe and sustainable landing. If we can do that, then I think we'll have done the task that the Budget Committee is originally established to do. Now it's simply a support system for a reconciliation measure that allows a simple majority for a pet political project of the majority party, period, end of story. For that, it's not worth keeping it. But I do think that there's a step between getting rid of the damn thing and its current parlous state where we can give it one last chance to see if it can produce a sensible bipartisan result. And I'd like to hear Senator Corker's response to
Yeah,
that.
I think
as a
you may be
respected
putting
member of
off the
committee.
inevitable, but I want to say that you and Senator Perdue have done great work together. You have a very ideological, y'all are vastly different in your view of the world, and yet y'all have worked together to come up with some processes that I think could well
So
work.
different, David?
With Senator McCaskill a few years ago, I introduced the CAP Act, which capped spending at a percentage of GDP. And I think y'all are looking at something very similar as it relates to total indebtedness. So I would encourage this committee to look at the work the two of you are doing. But everything has to be on budget. I think we would have to agree. And the problem is, as you mentioned, we use reconciliation with 50 votes, but it takes 60 votes in the Senate to put policies in place. So there's never policy follow-up to the budget proposals. I mean, just to talk about my side of the aisle, when you do away with ACA, but you keep the revenues that ACA is generating, obviously it's a hoax. And the other side of the aisle does the same thing. So I hope that hope you'll be very successful in this. This is the greatest threat to our nation. There's been a lot of talk about the tax issues, and obviously, and from my perspective, it could have been done a little bit better. Then we turned right around and passed a spending bill that raises deficits $2 trillion over the next 10 years, and we don't even talk about it. So both sides are guilty of huge deficits. Both sides like to spend money just on different things, but the processes we have will never, as they're now constructed, do the things we want to do as a country. So thank you all very much, and thank you for your work.
Thank you, Senator Corker, for your testimony this morning.